A princess from a small country wants to save her homeland, and for that she has to sign a peace treaty with other countries, but she soon finds out all the princes are way too weird. Hello and welcome back to our channel Ice Guy. Today we are going to do a recap of the anime series called Dame X Prince Anime Caravan. Episode 1. The anime starts with our heroine, Annie, the princess of a country called Inako. She travels to another country with her lovely knight, Theo, to sign a peace treaty in her father's stead. Upon reaching there, Annie looks at the castle and says to Theo that the castle is huge and by the looks of it, if they invade Inako they won't be able to stand a chance against them. Theo agrees and says that's true, as he is the only knight of Inako after all. Soon they go to sign the peace treaty, and while waiting to sign the treaty, Annie meets some colorful new people. First, it's the lovely Prince of Seraphine, Prince Lucellin Alphilazar, and the mysterious Chrome Rem, the Prime Minister of Seraphine. But suddenly a huge blast happens and out of the smoke comes a guy in a weird pose. This guy is Nerk, the Prince of Miladonia. He at once starts to boast and says that he sees that everyone is admiring his gloriousness. But Annie tells Nerk that she has no idea who he is and this boy is taken aback. But his pride doesn't allow him to admit that she doesn't know him, so he says how can she not know the beast that he is. But since Nerk is so dumb and thinks the world centers around him, he says to Annie that he knows that he is super handsome and because of that she must have lost her memory. Then he again makes a weird pose while saying to Annie that she should burn the picture of his awesomeness in her head. And suddenly his guards appear and they shout that Prince Nerak elite guards will make him shine. One of the guards is using a mirror to make sure the sunlight is falling on Nerk and the other sprinkles some flowers over him. Then Prince Nerk gives a portrait of him to Annie, and Annie says it looks expensive. Meanwhile, she is thinking in her head, what should she do? Should she sell it? Anyway, because Nerk is stupid, he runs off and the peace treaty seemingly cannot be signed. However, Miladonia's diplomats arrive and sign the treaty for Nerk, and Anna's task is complete. She goes to relax and drink some tea and meets the Miladonian aristocrat, Vino. And yes, he is just as ridiculous as Nerk. Our princess and her knight travel back to Inako where we meet Anna's parents. Her father says that he sent her because he is sick, otherwise he would have used his fists to solve everything.
Oh? そうか?
可憐な小川と青き大河の出会いを。
Papa?
Sometime later, Theo, the knight, is working in the fields while Anna's mother tells her she has to go to Miladonia to check something out for her. She tells Annie that she will have to act as a spy. Thus, the episode ends without meeting this one prince who appears in the shadows. However, we see him with Luz in the ending. Episode 2. The beginning of the episode continues the conversation between Annie and her mother. Annie says to her mother that it doesn't sound like she would be acting, but more like she would be invading the other country. Her mother doesn't listen to her and says that while she is on her mission, she should also sell some of the Inako products and bring back lots of money. Maybe this is the real reason for sending Annie. Thus, Annie and Theo travel to Miladonia. Before they leave, Anna's father gives her an egg-shaped item said to house their family's guardian, the Griffin. Once in Miladonia, Annie and Theo set up the caravan they traveled in at the marketplace to sell the Inako products. Suddenly, the egg starts breaking and what comes out is a baby griffin. The baby griffin, after hatching, says it needs the power of love to grow. Annie talks with some townspeople when suddenly Nerk shows up and Annie hides away. Meanwhile, back at the caravan, Theo suddenly realizes something and says that his princess senses are tingling, meaning Annie is in danger. So Theo runs off to find Annie, and we don't see him for the remainder of the episode. This leaves Annie alone to confront a man who yells at her for her caravan being at a particular spot. Annie tries to think of what to do when Vino comes to her rescue. Vino says that he is just a man who can't help but find all the little flowers in the world adorable. He further says all the girls in the world are little flowers. Hearing this, everyone starts to clap and admire him. Then Vino says to Annie that he thinks that she is special. Meanwhile, Annie thinks that she can't understand Vino at all. Vino then invites Annie to stay at his mansion for her visit. Annie declines, saying that she has her caravan, but Vino insists. Vino is very hospitable and gives Annie her room and even 2 personal maids. However, Nerk comes by to visit and of course, things go a bit crazy. Nerk wants to give one of his portraits to Annie again and takes her to his castle to choose one.
なんだかそこまで嫌ではない感じ。
僕のこともビーノって呼んでよ。
The corridor is full of Nerk's portraits or the roof. He asks Annie what does she think of this corridor, and then Nerk shows him a portrait and says to her that this is his favorite one. Nerk has Annie stay at his castle without asking her first and axes of the 2 maids. This pisses Annie off because axing the maids means they can't find another job after being fired. Annie tries explaining this to Nerk, but he doesn't listen. He only understands when Vino explains the situation to him in a way he could understand. After thinking for a bit, the two maids are rehired as personal maids for Annie within the castle. Annie is very pleased with this and thanks Nerk. The Milidonian prince decides to hold off on his first military campaign against Inako. Episode 3 begins with a magical girl sequence, where a magical girl appears and says anything out there can be solved with magic, and it is her, the revere me, worship her and kneel before her. However, it soon turns out this was just a scenario in the manga this Shuten prince was reading.
兄ちゃんへセレンファーレンからだねきっと素敵な
Princess Annie receives an invitation from the country of Serenfalen to attend the coronation of Prince Luz. When she arrives, she is instructed by the Prime Minister, Chrome, to help with the preparations. While cleaning the castle, Annie spots a puppet setting out a tray of finished food. She asks the prince and the Prime Minister about this. They tell Annie about Luz's brother, the second prince, Mare, and explain that Mare is a complete shut-in. They ask her if she can convince Mare to come to Luz's coronation and she agrees. So begins Annie's quest to befriend Mare. Anna's first attempts at convincing Mare ended up in failure. She wanders the castle and stumbles across some peculiar happenings. The Prime Minister is punishing someone and the other boy tells the Prime Minister that today he has to meet with a girl and that's why he changed his shifts without permission. Meanwhile, Annie, who is looking at all this, thinks that maybe she saw something that she shouldn't have. Afterward, Annie takes a walk around the city with Prince Luz. A rain shower suddenly occurs and they are instantly rushed under a makeshift tent so Luz would not get wet. But the streets are still wet after, so all the people lie down in line and make a bridge for the prince, just so he would not get wet. Meanwhile, Annie is shocked because of the behavior of these people. Annie continues her attempt to become friends with Mare by appealing to his interest in a certain magical girl, Kyorin. Annie eventually becomes friends with Mare and he helps her design an outfit for his brother's coronation. During the coronation, a solar eclipse occurs unknown to the people and they freak out, claiming the phenomenon as an ill omen. Prince Mare suddenly appears before them and explains the solar eclipse is a natural occurrence and that it is no ill omen. The sun returns and the people are relieved. Mare, however, starts saying the sun is too much bright and melting. Chrome announces that Luz's coronation will be postponed and will use the time to strengthen their relations with other nations.
どういたしましょうでも
Episode 4. Annie is working in the fields of Inako beginning in Episode 4. And as soon as she comes to the fields, someone says to her that the moment she got back home, she came to the fields to help. She is informed that there is a disturbance in the fields and it turns out that all the princes have come to visit Inako. And Mare is inside a chest. Annie asks why he is inside the chest. Meanwhile, Prince Nerk is boasting. As usual, he says to her that they should tell the legend to her kids about the time when Prince Nerk came and how miraculously he launches against this tree. The princes are visiting Inako to strengthen their relationships with the country. However, Inako is a rather small and humble forest nation. After showing the princes their rooms, Annie gives them a grand meal filled with Inako's finest dishes. However, all the princes start complaining about the food. Although Annie did her best, Prince Nerk says that this food was not even close to Maldonia's cousin and it was looky shabby too. How could they feed him this? He will not forgive her. Because the princes will not eat, Annie takes them all on a trip to the market to gather more ingredients. Many shenanigans occur, including the villagers taking pity on Nerk for his poor taste in clothes, giving Luz anything due to his glittering presence, and a marketplace upgrade competition between Luz and Nerk to quell the prince's brimming aspirations on how to upgrade Inako. Annie takes them to her favorite spot in her country, a grand view of all of Monaco. There, the princes begin to understand the humble nature of Inako and how simple life can be quite a luxury. Annie says although they don't have much luxury in Inako, it is their home and she loves everyone who lives there. And Nerk fights a boar right after. But as the boar attacks him, he gets on a tree, and the boar hits to the tree because of which it loses its senses. While Prince Nerk says with a little bit of preparation they could have hunted this boar more properly. The princes go back to the castle and now eat the food happily. The episode ends and Annie is told to go with the princes on their tour of other nations. And that's all for today, guys. If you liked the recap and want more summaries like this, consider subscribing to our channel.